Hi, folks. I'm Father Joe Grimaldi. You can call me Joe, and I'd like to welcome you to my podcast. But now, here's our host and friend, Ken Calvert.
You're obviously from the Bronx, New York. Tell me a little bit about growing up process for you as young Joe Grimaldi.
I'm the son of immigrants, both. My father came, he came to the United States around 1922.
Yeah.
And resided in Chicago, and right in the center of Chicago, actually. He was a butcher. He worked a long time at that. My mother was still in Italy at the time. She comes from a small town called Rogliano Gravina, which is in Calabria, more close to the ocean than to the mountains.
Okay.
My father's hometown is Rovito, which is in the Sila, which is a beautiful resort area, actually, but in the mountainside, if you want. But it was a marriage that was arranged by the two families, and eventually they had a child, my sister, Mary, and he came to the United States for adventure, let me put it that way, and she, my mom, remained in Italy, and of course in those days her life had to be very limited as a married woman, even though she was very young. She was only 15 when she was married. So she had to be guarded, as it were, because she was a married woman, and therefore even going to church, she was surrounded by family members so that, she wouldn't be looking around to see other people. So
I'm going to stop you for just a question, because by today's standards, your mom was totally subservient to your father.
Well, it was a very, very small town.
Okay.
To give you an idea, my father's town was probably population 7,000, and even though it was in a resort area, they were poor people. And my mother, on the other hand, was in Rogliano Gravina, in a bigger town, but only about 15,000 people. And don't forget, we're talking about the early 1900s, and so the customs were pretty strict, especially when you're dealing with a married woman who... Well, some of the things that I find very interesting in that marriage is that because he was, by today's standards, we would not consider him wealthy, but he was a comfortable landowner, if you want. And so when the marriage took place, even though they did not know each other, she went to his town to live. And it was really an interesting situation because she was greeted at my father's house by her mother-in-law, who was very welcoming to her, gave her the keys to the house and a palm leaf because that was a symbol of welcoming and peace and so on and so forth. So she was welcomed into her house, and she and her husband had to go upstairs where there was a small apartment, and they were locked in there for a week so they could get to know each other. And they couldn't leave that place until the next Sunday when they would go to Mass. In any case, food would be brought up to them and so on and so forth. But it was their way of getting to know each other, because they really didn't know each other at all.
Of course not.
It was an arranged marriage.
Yeah.
In any case, after about 16 or 17 years in the United States, my father decided to go back to Italy, and there he decided that maybe his wife should come with him to the United States. Well, my mother had a 17-year-old daughter by him, of course. He had left right after my mother was pregnant. In any case, and she was hesitant because she said, after all these years, why should I go, and so on. Well, her parents said, you're a married woman. You have to follow wherever he goes. And so sure enough, she eventually does go, but really hesitated because she missed her family, her surroundings, and so on. She goes to Chicago, and it was not a pleasant situation.
How old would she have been at that time?
She would have been in her early 30s at the time. And so she enters Chicago, and Chicago at that time is not a pleasant place for Italians anyway. And she never got used to it. I think it was about after 2 months. She told my father, we're leaving. If you'd like to come, you're welcome, but we are going for sure. And Naturally, my father was somewhat confused, but he did follow. So the three of them decided to explore places like Philadelphia and eventually settled in a cold water flat in New York City, which was where the Italian ghetto was, at 116th Street in the East River. Actually, it's not a bad place to live today, but in those days,
Yeah.
that was the ghetto. And it was a cold water flat, too, and that's where I was born in 1940. Um, so my life was around there for 10 years in that ghetto, and that was, by the way, at that time, very interesting, very interesting. They would celebrate the festivities of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. We were right in that parish. We celebrate that feast for 2 weeks. There was lots of local foods and rides and things of this sort. The kids really had a great time doing that stuff. In any case, we ended up moving in 1950. We ended up moving to the Bronx. Now, the Bronx at that time was mostly farmland. People don't realize that. It wasn't until 1970 that it started to develop in a very quick way, if you want, with lots of tenements and so on. But we lived in an Archie Bunker type house, if you want, in the Bronx. And at that time, there was a place called Freedom Land. It was an imitation of Disneyland. It was a big piece of property that was turned into a playground, hoping that they would make it, this type of thing. It failed after about 3 years, and in its place, you have these tremendous co-op buildings where thousands of people live now. But basically, we stayed in that Archie Bunker house on Pearsall Avenue. I still remember it. And it was not a bad place. I went to a place called All Hallows High School in the Bronx, right near Yankee Stadium, as a matter of fact. And at that school, we had the Christian Brothers of Ireland. After a while, I felt that I wanted to do what they were doing. And so I asked my parents if I could join that congregation. They were hesitant in the beginning, but they eventually gave me whatever support that I needed. So I started my career, if you want, as a Christian brother up in West Park, New York, which is not far from a lot of places that are familiar. A lot of the old mansions were along the Hudson there. We lived on a place that was, I'm familiar with those jerky food seasonings and so on and so forth. It was one of those mansions. It was a beautiful, beautiful place, really. We had the brothers had 1,000 acres there, and that's where we did my postulancy and then the novitiate. After that, I went to Iona College, which is run by the Christian Brothers. And in those days, after you get your degree, you were sent out to work in schools. And before 1962, the first assignment for the brothers was always a grade school, which we had a lot of throughout Canada, western part of the United States, and so on. In any case, I was one of the first to go directly into a high school. And I was privileged to go to Brother Rice High School in 1962.
And that started this entire love affair with the great state of Michigan and this Metro Detroit area.
Exactly. I really enjoyed those days because the school was just beginning.
Yep.
We had freshmen and sophomores, and we were beginning to accept the junior class. But it was exciting because we had to put desks into empty classrooms and get the place set up for the incoming freshmen and so on and so forth. In any case, I was there right up until about 1970 when I was made assistant principal and was working in some administration. But up until then, I was teaching French and Latin and English and religion. And 1974 is when I was assigned to Honolulu, a place called Damien High School. I was there for 6 years. In those days, the brothers had 6-year terms in administration. So after 6 years as principal in Honolulu, the provincial, Brother McGowan at the time.
There was a Brother McGowan at Brother Rice in Birmingham.
Same man.
Same man.
He
all right.
became provincial, and then
Okay.
so he said, "Would you like to come to Brother Rice again?" And I said, "Well, I've already been there for 12 years, whatever it was." And he said, "Well, they need you there as principal at this time." So back to Brother Rice.
That was a very happy day for a lot of people.
Well, it was for me, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
So, and that was back to Brother Rice in 1980, and I was there from 80 to 86. Meanwhile, I had asked if I could join the priesthood, and the provincial kept saying, "Let's pray over it," and eventually I said, "I'm going to be too old to do anything because I'll need to use a walker by that time."
Right.
So he says, no, let's pray over it, let's pray over it. By 1985, I said, "I've done enough praying, now I need to move." So I spoke to the Bishop of Honolulu, and he immediately set up the program for me, which meant that I would go to Catholic University starting in 1986. I was there for 3 years, and since the bishop at the time was a member of the Board of Trustees of the school in Rome, he said, "Would you mind going to Rome for a little?" I said, "In a heartbeat, I'll go." I think that was terrific.
Sure.
So I did the last year of my studies of theology at the Gregorian in Rome. So then back to Honolulu to be ordained in 1990, and after 5 years at St. John Vianney, which is a school in Kailua, a beautiful place of the islands, if you want, beautiful beaches and so on. I'm not a beach person, but it's a beautiful place to send visitors, if you want, when they come.
Oh, I bet.
So anyway, I was there for 5 years, and then back to Rome to study canon law at the Angelicum, which is a Dominican school. After finishing that, I came back to Honolulu, and I had double duty, if you want, both the vicar general for the diocese as well as the judicial vicar, which meant head of the tribunal. The tribunal, every diocese has a tribunal. Every diocese has a judicial vicar, if you want, and basically that's taking care of a lot of the church legal issues, but primarily you're dealing with annulments and working with married couples who are experiencing failed marriages. So I did that for a while, as well as became a troubleshooter with the various churches in the islands, and then decided I needed to retire, and I was going to leave the islands to work somewhere else for a while. And the bishop in Honolulu said, "Okay," but I'm sure that everybody thought I was too old to be accepted anywhere. But both the Bishop of Monterey and the Bishop of Santa Rosa welcomed me that day. I still remember when I called. You could come anytime. So I accepted the assignment in Monterey because, looking at the map, I noticed that Monterey is pretty much equidistant between Honolulu and Michigan. So it's a great place to be. And besides, it's not a bad place to be by itself, okay? So
I couldn't agree with you more.
But anyway, so my first assignment, the bishop needed somebody to be a chaplain at Dominican Hospital, which was in Santa Cruz. So he said, "Would you mind?" Oh, I wouldn't mind. I had done CPE at Catholic U, which meant that I had some credentials as a chaplain for a hospital, and I had never really worked in a hospital. I said, well, I think I would like to do that. So finally I was sent to Dominican Hospital in Santa Cruz and was there for just a few months, really. And it was Holy Thursday, which is the day that we celebrate the Eucharist and the priesthood. I got a call from the bishop who says, "Joe," he said, "Happy Priest Day." And I said, "Well, happy Priest Day to you too."
Yeah.
And so
They make a card for that?
I don't know if they do. They should, right? Hallmark is missing out.
Yeah, right.
But,
we could be onto something here.
That's right.
We could be onto something. Go ahead.
So basically from there, I was sent to a small place south of Santa Cruz, Corralitos, which is really a little bit of heaven if you want. It's in the middle of the produce area, where you have apples and strawberries and olati berries and all of these different types of berries all over the place. The Driscoll family, they are Catholic, and they were members of the Corralitas parish. And then the Martinellis with the apples, they're members of the parish as well. To make a long story short, while I was there in Corralitas, I noticed that there was something lacking. I noticed that the Spanish ministry had been neglected. Here we were right in the middle of the produce area, produce all around us with the apples and the berries and so on. So obviously a lot of Hispanics who were working there in the fields. So I said, wow, there are no Hispanics that come to this particular church. The name of it was Holy Eucharist Church.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of my first year there, I decided I would start a Spanish Mass. When I announced it, well, sure enough, some people were very upset. They felt that, oh, how could you let those people in here? And
Really?
I said, what people? I said, they're people that are working in your fields. And so he said, well, they're going to come and kill us. I said, well, they haven't done it in 40 years. They're not going to start now. So in any case, once the Hispanics felt that they were truly welcomed, having their own Mass, they developed a lot of beautiful devotions that the Anglos kind of liked. So the people were very upset that I was, starting a Mass in Spanish. But the devotions are very particularly beautiful, particularly to Our Lady of Guadalupe, which is
of course.
on the 12th of December. They have a custom where the novena, of course, 9 days before the actual feast, they assign different families per night to set up pastries and Mexican hot chocolate and cinnamon drinks and so on after the event. But the event itself is very moving. If you could imagine the beauty of the mariachi music singing the Marian hymns at each interval of the at the end of each decade of the Rosary, the children would bring roses up to the statue, if you want, and so that at the end of the evening, the area around Our Lady of Guadalupe was completely surrounded by roses. It was just a beautiful, beautiful experience, and the mariachi out was loud and clear because we were in the middle of nowhere, okay? There's no other houses around that were close by, so you could have your music as loud as you want. And the churches are so built that you have in and out, so it's not just enclosed. People were standing outside. We had large number of people attending. And then afterwards, it was very moving to see the Mexicans truly enjoying themselves, all with their serapes, because it's not that cold, but it's cold enough that you have to wear a serape. Oh. And they were drinking their hot chocolate and enjoying each other's company of the mariachi band going on. Well, that week culminated with their wanting to be the first in California to greet the Madonna. So on the 12th, early morning, at midnight, we had the Mass for Our Lady of Guadalupe. And you could imagine the joy among the people. It was unbelievable. With time, the Anglos accepted the Mexican Mass and the Mexican people, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, with the Anglos, their interest in having fundraisers included wine tasting. That's not really part of the Mexican spirit and their way of life and so on. Theirs would be more of fiestas. Huh? Well, the Anglos loved the fiestas,
of course,
and they loved the mariachi.
Oh, absolutely.
And they would come to every event that was that they would have. And so that the two communities started to interact in a beautiful way, and eventually they started to gel, and it's a great community. And I'm really pleased that I had a little bit of a part to play in that. This is Father Joe Grimaldi, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Father Joe Podcast.